Skid Racer Garage Inspection, a Crossout video by Dangerously Incompetent. Now the funny thing is, wheels aren't actually required on your builds to qualify for the wheeled race rules. See my video Royal Racer Drift, link in the description below. There's not an awful lot of friction between the ground and your other parts on your vehicle, and boosters can provide an awful lot of thrust. And thus, the Skid Racer is born. And it can go zooming around really fast until it goes too fast and goes boom. Some people are vehemently opposed to skid racers. They should have 4 wheels, it's not a proper car, it's too fast, and so on. But I say skid racers are totally in the spirit of Crossout. You take your parts and you mash them together, and you can end up with a build that can race around the industrial racetrack really, really fast. Having said that, it would be nice to have at least one race mode where the vehicles look like actual cars. 4 wheels required maybe, or 4,000 kilogram mass, minimum mass requirement. Just a suggestion there. Enough with the community arguments, this is a garage inspection after all. How does it work? How does it steer? If you've got no wheels, how do you steer? Well, you steer with these. You steer with 2 boosters that you mount sideways. And then when you fire them, you push the nose around. In fact, you're pushing the whole build around the centre of mass. It's rotating more or less around the centre of mass. And the further away those boosters are from the centre of mass, the greater the radial acceleration they produce, which means the faster you turn. In fact, you can turn so fast it's uncontrollable. You're oversteering all the time, and very difficult to control your build and get around those corners. How do you compensate for this? How do you bring your vehicle back under your control? Well, firstly, you can balance the build very finely. You get your boosters, depending on which sort they are and how much thrust they're producing, and you get them the right distance from the centre of mass that you're turning fast, but you've still got enough control to get around those bends. That's a difficult way of doing it. The easy way to do it is to get a wheel and plonk it on the back, and that produces enough friction that you're no longer uncontrollably spinning round, but you're still turning very fast, but you're still in control. And it doesn't have to be a big wheel or with a wheel with a lot of grip. You can go for the lowest. Well, I went for the lowest power reduction, which is actually the spiked wheel, but I didn't have one of those in stock, so I stuck the chained wheel on. And it's not the steering one either, because that's even more. You just want a bit of friction there, so a spiked wheel is ideal. Just plonk that on the back, and suddenly it's a lot more controllable. There's a third way of changing how fast the vehicle turns, or more accurately, changing the rotational acceleration. And that is to change the rotational inertia, which is a measure of where the mass is compared to the centre of mass. If all the mass of the vehicle is right in the centre, then this fixed thrust at this distance from the centre of mass would result in quite fast rotational acceleration. You turn really fast, making it hard to handle. Whereas if it's all spread out towards the ends, the same thrust results in a lot lower rotational acceleration, which makes it easy to handle because you're turning a lot slower. Well, the rate of your acceleration in your turn is a lot slower. The practical upshot is you take a heavy thing like the Hermes and you move it towards or further away from the centre of mass. Moving it away from the centre of mass means you turn slower, makes it easier to go around to turn into the direction you want. Moving it towards the centre of mass means you turn faster. The essence of the Skid Racer is low mass, high thrust. This build is designed for the small race where you're limited to 4 boosters. We've used 2 already for steering. That leaves us with just 2 boosters to push the vehicle forward. Your thrust is fixed, so to get the most acceleration you need as little mass as possible. You want everything light, no extraneous weight. Like a horn. Should chuck that off, but it's only 7 kilograms, and you need a bit of style, don't you? Anyway, the thrust is coming from boosters and not wheels, so cabin power is irrelevant. So you don't need a huge cabin. Just go for, but you have to have a cabin to make a legitimate build. Get the lightest cabin you can. And engines, they don't do anything for your thrust from boosters, so no engine at all, because they're quite heavy as well. If you do add a fuel tank and fuel barrel in anticipation of coming first and getting some lovely fuel, why not attach them via a rift? That way you can pop them off at the start of the race and not carry that 200 kilograms around the whole racetrack. See my video 2 pro tips for racers. You're going to need some parts to attach your boosters to your cabin in whatever configuration you choose, but don't use frames. That's a common mistake, is using frames to attach the boosters, because frames are actually quite heavy, even the lightweight ones. Your build doesn't actually need any frames to drive out the garage, but you do need frames if you're going to attach a movement part, in this case the wheel. So I've used the 2 lightest ones I can get to attach the wheel in a nice central position. You don't even need to use structural parts. You can use decor. And decor has the advantage of being generally very light indeed. Look at these hydraulic adapters, 9 kilograms. The downside of decor parts is they only tend to have an attachment on one side. So like this horn, it's only got attachments on one side, but these hydraulic adapters are unusual. They've got connectors on all 6 sides, so they're very useful when you're building a light build, and I recommend you get some. Which boosters should you use? Well, obviously you should use the ones with the most thrust. You should use a Hermes booster that push that vehicle past the finish line fast as possible, except that the Hermes also has the most mass, and more mass is less acceleration. So I don't know which ones are the optimum set of boosters to use for the small races, but I can tell you is you can generally get away with a smaller booster for steering. The mass of this vehicle is such that I don't need a Hermes to push the nose around fast enough to get around the corners. I can get away with a less thrust and lower mass of the blast-offs. If I look in my blueprints, here's another version of the same vehicle, almost exactly the same, except I've used blast-off boosters for the main thrust and AVI boosters for the steering. It works just as well. Very hard to tell the two apart in performance-wise. The lighter your vehicle is, the faster it will accelerate. But this vehicle is so light that when it hits a bump, its nose jumps up into the air, and if I'm thrusting at that point, then up it flies into the sky like a rocket, which gives you all sorts of control difficulties. So to counteract this, I've placed the forward boosters above the centre of gravity, and that has the effect of when you fire the boosters, the whole build rotates around the centre of gravity, pushing the nose down and return back to ground and back to stability. If one side of your vehicle hits a bump and jumps up, but the other side doesn't, you tend to roll over, and if your build is really narrow, there's nothing stopping it rolling over. That's why I make mine wide at the front. I put the boosters, the steering boosters, nose to nose, not side to side, and I make it even wider still by adding these chimney pipes, so that when one side hits a bump and tries to roll over that way, this chimney pipe ends up dragging on the ground and pushing it back into level skidding, because you don't want to skid round on your roof. You can do it, but you lose the controllability because the wheel is no longer touching the ground, and even worse, your left and right thrusting is reversed, which is really confusing. So don't roll around on your roof if you can. If you do end up on your roof, then I suggest you use the self-destruct to get right way round again, because you lose hardly any time when you self-destruct. You lose a lot more time trying to cope with the reverse controls and trying to bash yourself off the walls or other players to get yourself the right way up. A great advantage for the skid racer design for new players is that it can be done really cheaply. I mean, this one isn't done cheaply. This one costs, what, 1,200 coins, but that's because I'm using Hermes and I'm using the Duster cabin, which isn't the one you can make. This one you can only get off the market for 245 coins, but you could make do with the Sprinter, which is almost as good, it's just a little bit heavier, and that costs less than 2 coins. And similarly, you can make do with a common wheel. You don't need the fuel tanks, and instead of using hydraulic adapters, which cost 18 a time, you can make do with the actual structural parts you get off, I think it's Lunatics, for buggy floors and small buggy floors and that. You can totally rebuild this build with common parts for under 20 coin, and that will get you a racer that will beat 95% of wheeled builds that you will encounter in race. So unless you're really intent on driving an art build around in race, I suggest you race in a skid racer. That's it for this video. I'll see you in race, or maybe one of those other lesser battles. Oh, and if you want to try out the skid racer for yourself, I'll put it in the exhibition under DI Skid Racer.